Okay, Jai Baba, everyone.
Hey, Baba.
Hey, Baba.
Hey, Baba.
All right, so just a few of us here today. Let me do one more thing before we start here. Does this sound better than I did before?
You sound great anyway, Richie.
Sounds okay, but I actually think it was a little better before.
Okay,
I think so too.
very good. I'll take that out. Okay. All right, just a few of us today. So everyone will be
Now
on.
you sound far away, Richie.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, I'll go back to the other way here. Is that better?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Is it for you, Marvin?
Yes, yeah, better.
Okay.
Okay, how about like this?
That's good.
Okay. Very good. So we'll go ahead and start. So what these meetings are is something I just come to realize is I'm looking for common themes in Mayor Baba's teachings. And by that I mean, for example, the first two meetings, we looked at imagination and the spiritual path, and then we looked at is free will an illusion. And in each of these, for example, in imagination and the spiritual path, we looked at this theme that Baba presents from his explanations of creation of the universe, the formation of the ego, the use of imagination and meditation, and how imagination is really part of the spiritual path. So this theme about imagination is something that's throughout Baba's different teachings. And so what I try to do is to try to find these common themes. And so like is this question about free will and illusion, Baba speaks about determinism through sanskaras. He talks about the ego as the illusion creating entity in our minds that creates the sense that we have free will. And a way to come to the realization that we don't, and to the realization, of course, of the truth, is through obedience and surrenderance. So today, I'm going to focus on one other theme. And this theme is, I refer to as nothingness. And nothingness, Baba speaks about actually, in a sense, in many different ways. And starting with the creation of the universe, then the nature of consciousness, the elimination of the ego, stilling the mind through meditation, and then spiritual advancement and nirvana. And so that's what we're going to look at today. Okay. So what I've done is I just taken sections out of different discourses, or in this case, God Speaks, to try to weave together this theme that Bob is presenting. So Marvin, if you feel like reading, if you can see that well enough.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
All right. Creation of the universe. Everything by virtue of being everything embodies even nothing. Or else everything can never mean everything. This nothing is latent in the everything. But nothing, being literally nothing, the very being of being nothing, is nothing at all. In the God is state, where the nothing is latent, automatically by the nature of nothingness, consciousness also exists as nothing. Accordingly, consciousness in the beyond state of God is ever and ever latent in God, who is by nature the everything, infinite and unlimited and unbounded.
Okay. So of course, God Speaks is the heady intellectual aspects of Baba's revelations, but this is where the discussion of the nothing kind of begins and where we'll see it ends. And of course, everything is God, the infinite. And what Baba is saying here is that everything embodies everything, even though in a state of everything, everything is unified, but everything that's going to ever exist in the universe exists as potential in this state, including the nothing, or basically everything that is going to be ever manifest in the universe actually comes out of the nothing. And that includes consciousness. So, and including, of course, all the stars, the galaxies, you and I, everything is latent in the everything, but everything is unified, including consciousness, and they're all part of the nothing. Okay, Marvin, you want to continue?
Okay. When the nothing first became manifested as nothingness in the shape of creation, the primal manifestation of the nothing gave rise to the first trace of consciousness in God.
Okay, so there we have consciousness emerging in the the first thing that manifested is the most minute level of consciousness, and it's coming out of the nothing or nothingness. Okay, so that's the first topic that covers where Baba speaks about nothingness. And the next one is having to do with the nature of consciousness. So Paula, would you like to read that? Paula, where are you living, Paula?
Oakland, Washington.
As in DC?
No, Washington State.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Which
It's
town do you live in? Where do you live in Washington State?
Kirkland. It's across the water from Seattle.
Oh, okay.
Lake Washington. Yeah, it's part of Seattle.
Okay, so nothing to read yet. Here we come. Here we go.
In human form, the soul achieves full and complete consciousness. Therefore, the soul, having now gained full and complete consciousness in human form, does not need any more or any other higher forms to evolve consciousness. In short, there is no new consciousness to be attained to realize reality, the eternal. It is the same consciousness.
So the consciousness that we have as human beings, Baba says, doesn't need to evolve any further. And it will be the same consciousness when we advance spiritually that will experience the different planes through, and then even God through. In other words, consciousness, the nature of consciousness doesn't change, but what we become conscious of changes. Okay, so Paula, you want to continue?
Sure. The nature of consciousness. When the individual mind is dissolved, the whole universe relative to the mind vanishes into nothingness. And consciousness is no longer tied to anything. Consciousness is now unlimited and unclouded by anything and serves the purpose of illumining the state of infinite reality.
So again, here, this is what Baba is describing is the realization of truth, the realization of God. The mind dissolves, the whole universe vanishes into nothingness. So again, Baba is referring to nothingness, and we see that consciousness survives beyond that, beyond the mind and beyond the universe. So it gives us a clue as to what the nature of consciousness is. So I'll read this part. These are my own words. These are not Baba's words. So if consciousness can transcend the mind and exist separate from it, then clearly it is different than thinking or feeling and any other aspect of the mind. Thinking, feeling, and so on is a mental activity and therefore only occurs within the mind. So if consciousness is not thinking, then what is it? And my understanding is that consciousness is pure, unadulterated awareness. And being pure awareness, consciousness has no attributes. It's not thinking, it's not feeling, it's not sensations. Consciousness, therefore, can't be seen, tasted, touched, or smelled, and neither can consciousness be heard or seen. we can be conscious. So consciousness is beyond all of our senses and all of our mental operations, internal feelings. We can be conscious of our thoughts, and we can be conscious of our feelings and what we see and what we hear. But consciousness itself cannot be actually conceived of or felt or seen or heard. You can't feel consciousness, you can't hear consciousness, you can't see it. I mean, we're thinking about it, kind of, but you really can't. It's beyond conception, is my understanding. So therefore, it's that, although consciousness is which gives us awareness of our very own existence, it lacks any physical attributes. And therefore, we can only describe its attributes as being of nothingness. There's nothing in the universe that we can say. Like if we see light, well, we know light is a physical attribute. If we hear sounds, we know sound is a physical attribute, but consciousness lacks any of those physical attributes. And so in a sense, the only thing that you can use to describe it is nothingness. Okay, so now we'll move into the next section dealing with the elimination of the ego. Marge, do you want to read that?
Sure. Elimination of the ego. In the pre-human stage, consciousness has experiences, but these experiences are not explicitly brought into relation with the central I. For example, a dog may get angry, but it does not continue to feel I am angry. Even in this case, we find that the dog learns through some experiences and thus bases the action of one experience on another. But this action is a result of a semi-mechanical tension of connected imprints or samskaras. It is different from the intelligent synthesis of experiences that the development of I, consciousness, makes possible. The first step in submitting the working of isolated impressions to intelligent regulation consists in bringing them all into relation with the center of consciousness, which appears as the explicit limited ego. The consolidation of ego consciousness is most clear and defined from the beginning of human consciousness.
Okay, so again, Baba is saying human consciousness is unique. Pre-human conscious animals and so on have experience, but they're not brought into this notion of a central I or a self. And but in humans, it is. Okay. So, Marge, you want to continue?
Elimination of the ego. It would be a mistake, therefore, to imagine that the arising of the ego is without any purpose. Though it arises only to vanish in the end, it does temporarily fulfill a need that could not have been ignored in the long journey of the soul. The ego is not meant to be a permanent handicap, since it can be transcended and outgrown through spiritual endeavor. But the phase of ego formation must nevertheless be looked upon as a necessary evil, which has to come into existence for the time being.
So here we see the Baba saying the ego serves a purpose, a very important purpose, which through in the evolutionary process helps humans develop the capacity for consciousness. But in the end, the ego itself has to vanish. In other words, it has to return or become nothingness itself. Okay, Paul, I didn't see you before. Welcome.
Are you
Paul,
talking?
I don't know if your audio's on.
No, is it me? Is it Paula?
It's Paul. Paul.
Oh, there I am.
There you go, Paul. Yeah.
Hi.
Lynn, you're muted too, Lynn. Okay, Paul, would you like to continue reading here?
Sure. The elimination of the ego. The ego thus marks and fulfills a certain necessity in the further progress of consciousness. However, since the ego takes shelter in the false idea of being the body, it is a source of much illusion, which vitiates experience.
All right, yeah, you can continue there.
The disintegration of the ego culminates in realizing the truth.
Right. So again, when the ego disintegrates, which would mean returning back to nothingness, it culminates in realizing the truth.
Hmm.
And once you finish this one, Paul.
Sure. When the ego disappears entirely, there arises knowledge of the true self. Thus, the long journey of the soul consists in developing from animal consciousness the explicit self-consciousness as a limited I. Then, in transcending the state of the limited I of human consciousness through the medium of the master. At this stage, the soul is initiated into the consciousness of the supreme and real self as an everlasting and infinite I am, in which there is no separatedness and which includes all existence.
All right. So we see that as we know, this elimination of the ego, the slimming of the ego, is that which brings about spiritual advancement. So another way of advancing is through meditation, and particularly the stilling of the mind. So hi, Greg. Your audio, you're muted, Greg.
Yes,
Do you want to, do you feel like reading?
sure.
Okay.
Filling the mind through meditation. Meditation may be described as a path that the individual cuts for himself while trying to get beyond the limitations of the mind. Just from the Discourses, and also from the Discourses, meditation has to serve the purpose of associating consciousness with the eternal truth and of dissociating consciousness from the false and unimportant things of the phenomenal world.
So we see here, Bob had mentioned that it's the disintegration of the mind and the disintegration of the ego that takes us along the spiritual path. And so meditation is one of those means in which we disassociate from those things of the world or the universe and try to associate ourselves with the divine, with God. Okay, Greg, you want to continue?
Yes, the disappearance of mental operations of all types contributes toward making the mind absolutely still without allowing consciousness to fall into abeyance. All thoughts that appear in the mind of the aspirant are forms of perturbation and have their origin in the momentum of stored samskaras. The agitation of the mind can disappear only when the aspirant can so control his mind that all thoughts can be ruled out at will. Only in complete internal silence is truth found. When the surface of the lake is still, it reflects the stars. When the mind is tranquil, it reflects the nature of the soul as it is.
Okay, so one more on meditation here, Greg.
The forms of meditation concerned with the subject of experience, however, suffer from the handicap that the true subject of experience can never be the object of thought or meditation in the ordinary sense. Thus, these forms of meditation can at best take the aspirant very close to self-knowledge, which can only dawn in its full glory when the domain of the mind is completely traversed. Some impersonal forms of specialized meditation are therefore concerned with mental operations, and they ultimately aim at stilling the mind.
Okay, so again, first of all, I'll just say this, when Baba speaks about the subject of experience, he divides experience and meditation into two types, broadly speaking. So you could think about this object of experience. The object could be the world, the universe, and so on. And in some ways, it's actually our own thinking, but that's the subjective experience, what he means by the true subjective experience, can never be the object of thought. God is beyond comprehension. And so the only way that can be experienced is when we no longer use any senses or feelings or thinking in order to attempt to experience it. It only comes when the mind is completely still. And again, so I'm equating the mind becoming still, you'll see, with another aspect of nothingness. Okay, so then we'll get on to the final topic in which, an arena in which Baba discusses the aspects of nothingness, and that has to do with spiritual advancement and nirvana. So Daniel, would you like to read these parts?
Sure. The dawn of love facilitates the death of selfishness. Being is dying by loving.
Right. So of course, death is, we know death, of course, we have reincarnation, but the death of selfishness is tied to the annihilation of the mind and another aspect of becoming nothing. Okay, Daniel?
I want to go back to that one, Rich, if I can.
Okay. Let me see if I can here.
Can I ask you a question about it, or I don't want to interrupt your flow, but I have a question or comment about that.
Okay. Let me see if I can, because I think I can do that here. Okay, there we go. Whoops, darn it.
It's 34, I think.
Yeah, here we go.
I've always been intrigued by this statement, being is dying by loving. And when I read it like this, it's helpful. It sounds like we enter a state of being when our selfishness dies, and our selfishness dies by loving. Is that a fair statement about that?
Yeah, I think so. I think when Baba uses the term being, in the ultimate sense, that which exists is God, and so being and godliness is synonymous. But I think the process or the spiritual advancement, there are stages, and so there are greater degrees of awareness of being. And so, yeah, I think the death of selfishness, the death of the ego, the annihilation of the mind, all those things are aspects of spiritual advancement.
Right.
But maybe someone else has some thoughts on it. Nope. Okay. Does that?
Yeah, it's just breaking it down this way is helpful, because it's a very deep and very compressed statement about being is dying by loving. I've really thought about it for many years about what that means. Oh, I can go on.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Rick, I was just thinking that when one loves someone, there's, in the ultimate sense, there's no sense of self. So with the loss of self, there is that dying, which gets you to that being state. Mm-hmm. So working from loving to the act, by truly loving, we forget ourselves. And that is essentially a dying. And the outcome of that is that we're in that state of being.
Yeah, that's nice, Paul.
I notice also that the way the statement is cast, it's not about something that you have to do. You could take it that way, and it would probably be good if you do. But he's just saying that's what it is. I mean, he's defying what it means to be. And also, Dan, I just want to thank you for calling attention to this statement because I've looked at it for years, and unlike you, I haven't thought about it at all. I always read it and I said, "Oh yeah, being is dying by loving." But you're right; it's quite a statement.
Yeah.
It's also, to me, an active process, so that anytime the loving is there to create dying, also creates being. It's kind of like Baba says about surrender. It's not something you do once, but it's a repeated process. And this, to me, is also saying the way it's written, a very active form, is that it's something that can be done little by little.
You know, it strikes me, I find it paradoxical, honestly, the statement. And and I really appreciate what everybody's saying about it. It's really helping me go into it. But I do find it paradoxical because being is a state. It's like it just is, right? It's just, so it's a being is like a state. But then it says dying by loving as a process. It's like it's combining, it's equating one thing that's a state with another thing that's a process. I don't know. That's why I've never sort of thought about why I wrestled with this, but that is why I've wrestled with it. Is I find it a paradoxical statement that way.
Well, if you read it more like, I see what you're saying. So you're saying there's a state of beingness.
Right. The being just
as
is.
opposed to an act of being.
That's right. Being is just a state. I think that's what he's talking about, is the state of being, that where you just are, where your existence just is, Yeah. But
just looking at the words, I see that they all end in ing.
ING, yeah.
It's true. Anyway,
Okay.
I appreciate the conversation about it. Thank you.
Yeah, it was good. So let's Dan, you want to continue?
Sure. With the surrenderance of self-will and ego-centered imagination, there arises a true perception of the infinite worth of that which is.
So, getting back to this notion of what is being, being is that which is, capital IS. And I took this in because, again, we're talking about, so one is dying, in a sense. Surrendering is a form of dying, one could say. One is, you're letting go, you're surrendering. So all of this is kind of a process leading towards nothingness, becoming nothing. Okay, Daniel, you want to continue?
When the individual mind is dissolved, the whole universe relative to the mind vanishes into nothingness, and consciousness is no longer tied to anything. Consciousness is now unlimited and unclouded by anything, and serves the purpose of illumining the state of infinite reality.
Okay, so again, we see vanishing into nothingness. So again, this theme of nothingness comes once again, and it comes through the dissolvement of the mind and the universe.
The piercing of the mind amounts to the complete withdrawal of consciousness from the universe to its total absorption in God. Do you know what piercing of the mind means? Does anybody?
I wonder if it's something about the bubble of our consciousness of identification, of thinking we know who we are, is burst. That bubble is burst. The mind is pierced.
That's the image that comes to my mind.
Mm-hmm. Good.
So, okay. I was going to maybe have Lynn read this last section. Lynn, do you want to read?
Yeah.
Okay.
Spiritual advancement and nirvana. Fana is the passing away in the absolute vacuum of the original God is state.
So there are two states, there's Fana and Baka. And as one travels through the planes, there's a Fana, which is the passing away in state or the annihilation state. And then there's a Baka, which is the abiding in state. So if you're in the first plane, you have like a minor annihilation of the world. And then the Baka is the residing in the first plane. So what Bob is referring to here is the final Phala, which is the passing away in the absolute vacuum of the original God is state. Okay, so Lynn?
Only when the impressioned consciousness is freed from all impressions is liberation or mukti in human form attained as nirvana or fana, where only consciousness is and where all else of the nothing, which was as nothingness, vanishes forever.
So in this state, consciousness is freed, nirvana is experienced, and there's only consciousness. And again, what Baba refers to of the nothing is actually the entire universe. It's that which came out, everything that came out of the nothing, the original whim, the state from where everything of the universe came out of the original nothing, which was, of course, came out of the original everything. So now we're returning back into nothingness. Okay, Lynn, let's.
Nirvana is that state where apparently God is not. This is the only state where God is not and consciousness is. Only consciousness remains, experiencing absolute vacuum.
And then, I didn't have it here, but immediately after nirvana, one experiences consciousness of God, the final Baka, or merging into the infinite, merging in God.
Well, I don't understand why that's the only state in which consciousness is and God is not, because wouldn't that equally apply to being conscious of the illusion?
Oh, I think what Bob is referring to there is that, oh, I see what you're saying, well, it's the only state in which the only thing that exists is consciousness, the way I understand it. So the universe no longer exists. Let me see if I get that slide back here.
The only state where consciousness has no object whatsoever.
Yeah.
Strictly speaking, it's the only one where God is not, in the sense that it's used there. Anyway, not important.
Well, it's interesting. Yeah.
Well, let me say something. I think it's the experience of just isness, and is a huge, vast vacuum, absolute vacuum, he says. So it's almost like the original state of God, except with consciousness. And so there's no feeling, I guess, of God being there at that moment. It's just you alone, and it's pretty much what they say nirvana is. And then the next instant, there is a experience of the I am God state.
Yeah, that's right.
It is really a curious place, because I usually think about, because it's what's usually talked about, is sort of the journey from sound sleep to awakeness, full awakeness, and this full awakeness is is basically characterized as what you get when you are conscious in sound sleep. But this is a third state. You can be conscious, but neither in sound sleep nor conscious of self.
Right.
I wonder if Baba is talking, is just talking that God in this, where he says God is not, that God is a mental concept, and so the idea of God or the thought of God doesn't exist. Only consciousness is. So it's that pure state that even the concept of God doesn't exist.
Hmm.
Yeah, that could be.
That sounds good. Yeah, sounds right.
This is where Baba said Buddha's mistake was.
Yeah, that's right.
I
So
assume
you said there was, because he said something like there was no God or something like that.
yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
He focused
Yeah,
on
Buddha put
Nirvana
more emphasis on the Nirvana state.
than Nirvikalpa Samadhi.
You're right, which is the God realized state.
Right.
So as far as we know, did Buddha ever even say anything about Nirvikalpa or by any other name?
I don't know Buddhism well enough. All I know is that all I heard was that Baba had said that was the Buddha's mistake, was that that's what he designated as the end state
Right.
of spiritual development. So I would assume from that he did not speak about Nirvikalpa Samadhi.
How the heck could the avatar make a mistake like that? That's
Baba said they all make one intentional perfect mistake.
Yeah. But it's
It
interesting.
takes the pressure off of us.
It's interesting to speculate though why he made that particular mistake.
I actually
kind of a whopper.
Yeah.
I read something very recently about the reason that there was so much like intellectual thought. There was so many deities. They were all, so he kind of went the opposite, got away from the deities, just told everybody how to get there. Because once you reach Nirvana, well, you're there.
Yeah.
And it seems like it's kind of related to what Paul said, is it's a consciousness that is without a mental construct of God that can be a limitation for some people.
Yeah.
Maybe opens up a different path.
Yeah, so
Except that by the time you're at Nirvana, the mind is stopped. So well, I don't know. Anyway.
yeah. So, one of the things that Baba said is the avatar always tailors his message to the culture and time. So this, of course, is what I think, Marvin, you were saying, is because at that time there was so much emphasis on intellectual and deities and so on, that this is what the culture needed at that time in history.
Mm.
That makes a lot of sense, Marvin, what you said.
Okay, just to kind of finalize things here. So I was looking for this theme of nothingness and how it shows up in various topics that Baba discusses. So beginning with the creation of the universe, the nothing emerges from the everything, and out of the nothing comes the universe. The nature of consciousness is something which has as its attribute, the only attribute you can define in terms of the physical universe is that, besides for awareness, the awareness is that it has no attribute. It's attributeless. There's no physical correlate for consciousness within the universe. So its attribute is nothingness. And then what we need to do, the ego is an important aspect of the evolution of consciousness in the human form. It's a necessary evil, necessary to have a sense of self in order to have the formation of consciousness. But then, of course, the ego has to be eliminated. And so it itself must become nothing. And one of the tools of doing that is through stilling the mind through meditation. And what we saw there is that, the mind has to become nothing. Eventually, the mind has to be transcended. So all thoughts have to cease, all feelings and sensations need to cease. And eventually, when you get to the end of the process, nirvana, you return back to that experience of nothingness. So you're actually experiencing the nothingness at that point, not the everything, but just the nothingness. And then immediately thereafter, you merge into the everything, into God. So that's what I prepared for today.
Okay.
I don't know if anyone else has any comments or questions. So I know it's a little shorter today.
Hey, Rich, just to tie in from the last week's session, how would you, where would you put the idea about free will? How would this tie into that from?
Yeah, so we did see that quote where, we need to surrender our self-will and imagination. That was back there. So surrender, of course, is another aspect of moving towards being nothing. We're surrendering ourself, and the illusion of free will comes from the ego. The ego makes us think we're doing this, I do this, I'm talking now, I'm looking at the screen, and so on. And so the ego needs to be eliminated, and we begin the slimming down of the ego, the sensation, the slimming down of our imagination, we move slowly towards being nothing. And and as we do that, we come more and more to the realization that we don't really have free will, and everything is God's will. I don't have any of this experience, and this is just what I understand from reading Baba.
Mm-hmm.
So does that seem to make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm-hmm.
So one of the things I'll just say is, in the beginning, I don't know if everyone was here at the beginning, but if you weren't, I'm just going to go back to slide number 1 here, or where was I here? Just that, what I'm attempting to do, whoops, that's not really, well, yeah, that's not it, sorry, is to look for the common themes in Baba's teaching. So in one way or another, I think they're all basically saying the same thing. So when Baba speaks about imagination, the spiritual path, when he addresses the issue of sanskaric determination and free will, self-will, and illusion, and even this topic of nothingness, it's all really the same process. Baba's approaching it from various different aspects. So there's these common themes, and then there's these various topics. And so whether it's free will or imagination or this discussion of nothingness, it's all the same process, just being explained in different words from a different perspective.
So Rich, let me ask you something, and I'm sorry I missed the opening. I was on another call, but the way I took in the way nothing and nothingness was being referred to here, it was sort of like the goal is awareness of nothing, which then opens up, God or something like that. That you want to still the mind to get to a place of nothingness. You want to eliminate the ego to get to a place of nothing. I mean, that's sort of how something like that. But when Baba talks about the everything and the nothing, I assume and Baba says many times, he says the universe is nothing, and so, he's talking about the entire illusion as being nothing, not just these exalted states or these advanced states. He's saying nothing is what we experience all the time in our consciousness, we try to make something out of, we try to make it into something, but he said the actual nature of it is nothing. So how do you reconcile that? Because the way you're using nothing and that use of the word nothing sound different to me, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's the same.
Yeah, I don't see a difference. The universe springs out of nothingness, and therefore the universe is nothing.
Well,
So
you know,
to-
in Infinite Intelligence, he talks a lot about false thinking, and that's the state that we're in through this whole long journey of the spiritual path. And that's when you think the nothing is something. And so the difference between that and Nirvana is you finally got to the point where you realize the nothing is really nothing.
So
It was nothing all along, but for such a long time, you thought it was something, no matter how you talked about it.
yeah, so Daniel, does that?
yeah, I'm just trying to reconcile these notions. You know, it's helpful. I need to digest it.
I don't know why, but I keep on getting the image as everyone is talking of a movie. When one watches a movie, one can be so engrossed in it, or if you're an actor, you're so engrossed into it that it seems like it's real. And what I'm hearing from what our discussion today is that through meditation or mindfulness, or as Baba describes it, is being able to see that movie, witnessing the movie rather than being involved in it. I don't know if that makes any.
That's a good, it's a good
Yeah,
analogy.
and you know, Baba used that analogy quite often when he was talking during Sahabbases or whatnot. He would often use that analogy of a film to illustrate how what we're experiencing is really just an illusion also.
Somebody wrote,
And I just wonder, Rich, that when we're in that meditation state, we're able to observe it as a movie. And so we're from that state of nothingness, as we get to that state of nothingness.
Yeah, one of the various techniques that Baba recommends for meditation is just considering oneself as the witness. So you observe your thoughts, but you don't consider they're your thoughts. You just watch your thoughts. And ultimately, that's what the soul is doing. It is experiencing all of this, but it's really not. The soul is not the entity.
So you're linking up to the being the observer.
Right.
so just, I want to take this from a slightly different angle. Some guy wrote a book a number of years back called Don't Sweat the Small Stuff. I'm sure some of you have seen it, whatever. I never read very much of it. I read a little bit of it, but I sort of felt like I got the idea, and that was as far as I could go. But I think it's a sort of natural process in life that things that you once paid a lot of attention to, eventually you don't pay so much attention to. They just cease to be very important to you. And this could be anything. It could be, I don't know, it might be a certain kind of annoying comment that some person you knew made or whatever, or it could be having a nice car. It could be anything that you once, it impacted you, it mattered to you. And then over time, it just matters to you less and less, so that you no longer really care whether you have that car or not, or if somebody says such and such thing, you just no longer give it much bandwidth. And if you continue that process far enough, and sort of bit by bit apply it to the entire universe, it's sort of a process of realizing that that's the small stuff. It doesn't matter, and it's not really where you want to put your attention. And I think if you carry that process far enough, it would in the end disappear because you just no longer give it any attention. It just ceases to be compelling enough to get your attention.
Yeah. And, I think we're going through the stages then of moving into that. Those things are becoming like nothing. So we're moving towards that ultimate state.
Yeah, like you could be freaking out about the pandemic. It's on everybody's mind, but then I don't know, probably many of you are going through a similar process. I know for myself, I mean, I'm aware of it all the time because obviously you kind of have to be, and then you're reminded of it in so many millions of ways. But yet you kind of have to go through this process of getting back to, you can't spend all of your time thinking about the pandemic. You have to live. And so you just sort of give it a little bit less attention. And over time, it begins to be more of a passing thing that isn't so worthy of so much attention.
Well, another example of it, and I think it's an example that Baba used when he talked about whether or not people should lead celibate lives or not. And he said it's not a question of forcing yourself to be a celibate. He said at some point it's it's worn out, that desire pattern has started to wear itself out. He said that's the point where you attempt something like that rather than trying to force yourself through repression or coercion or anything like that. But that it's a more natural process. It's like leaves that are getting ready to fall off a tree because they're no longer serving any useful purpose for the tree. They're not nutritive. They're not feeding anything in the tree. So I think that was the metaphor that Bobby used. So
yeah, that's a good example.
I turned the my slides off so we can each see each other a little better if you wish.
we haven't heard from Richard Blum on the bottom of the screen.
Is that me? It's not me. I think.
I got Richard Blum on the bottom of my screen with a.
Oh yeah.
Signed on early.
I'll make him disappear.
Came back in.
Let's see here. Leave me. There he goes. Bye.
There we go.
He's gone.
That's better, actually.
Oh, now the pictures fit on my screen much better. Thank you, Richard.
Yeah.
And I guess everyone knows they can go into that mode where you just see the speaker, whoever that is, and then they become full screen.
Okay.
I thought it was interesting in the analogy with the dog getting angry. It's a process where all of these forces have to become congruent to form an ego. And so the dog hasn't made it to that level yet of human consciousness to have an integrating ego to know that when he's upset or angry, I think was the quote, that he experiences it and he lets it go, and then he doesn't continue to think, I am angry. And then we go to the human state where I can continue to think I am angry. And then Bob is helping us to work through that in his messages so that I feel the anger and then I let it go and I don't want to become, but I am angry. So there's that progression to build up, and then it has to go through that and kind of come out the other side to let go of it and go back towards becoming closer to God.
So we have to become more like dogs.
After we've
I realize that's a joke, but it is a very, I was thinking as you were talking, Lynn, that there must be some point to being able for this period of time to realize that I am the one who is angry. and to sort of even having the capacity to hang on to that. I'm not sure a dog could do it if he tried. And
Right.
so there must be some interim value for being able to do such things. Must be important.
I guess
For,
become more
you mean for,
conscious of it.
yeah, well, Baba says the ego is necessary for humans to have consciousness. So without our ego, our ego had not evolved in our ability to use language and so on, we would not have consciousness.
Well, I mean, but a dog, does a dog have an ego? I guess he has a sort of an ego.
Well, I don't know, that'd be in that section, I could bring it back up, but that quote, Baba differentiates human consciousness from animal consciousness. And he's differentiating how a human experiences, I am angry, whereas a dog doesn't conceive in that sense. So he says that animals have experience, but they don't have full and complete consciousness. And I don't think that, they don't have the language to think, to integrate, and what Baba says, to integrate these experiences in an intelligent way. That's the capacity that the human ego and intellect gives us.
Well, the purpose of the ego.
So in the ego consciousness, there's more of a fulfillment of a false I, right? That can take in a whole bunch of different experiences and create a false I. Where a dog, we have a puppy. Our dog, if he doesn't like something, he doesn't like it for that moment. He doesn't accumulate it, those experiences. He just feels angry or he'll bark, or if he's fearful, he'll do that in the instant. But it seems like in the human form, we all develop this false I-ness where it's accumulation of things. And I remember that person did this to me, and we bring that all together into this falseness that we create, which is, I guess, the ego.
So, Paul, I think animals do actually have cumulative experiences and perspectives. There are animals that are traumatized, by abuse, or have, I've got two cats, and
You're right.
I see lots of evidence of evolution of their feelings, as they develop more trust, or they like that their behavior changes, and that's a cumulative impact. I think, to me, it's what seems to make sense is something about that. These are what you have in these lower forms is more limited kinds of consciousness. And Baba says that consciousness is only fully developed in the human form. So what you're getting is various gradations of consciousness of the self. So the dog has some consciousness, the cat has some, they all have some, but it keeps growing and growing. And then you get to chimpanzees, and they have even more consciousness.
Yeah.
And then they're the human form. And then Baba says then consciousness is really actually complete, almost structurally complete, but it has all that residue. And then, I think that's, I think it's, I don't.
Yeah,
I don't
that makes, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense, Daniel. I mean, I don't. I think maybe doesn't Baba talk about that the level of consciousness being in the form of a lot of instinct too, right?
Yeah.
That animals develop.
Yep.
A form of instinct.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
But yeah, they can be traumatized. They can experience things. You're right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so they have some degree of consciousness. They have experience, but it's not full and complete.
Right, but they're from what I can see, they're integrating as they go too. They're not, for one thing, they're just by taking a certain form and advancing it through different evolution of forms, they're integrating what came before them into a higher level form, and so they're always integrating as they go. It's just it's becoming, it's going from low complexity to high complexity is what it's going to.
Oh, I know
Daniel, I guess what I was getting at was that I don't see a dog having feelings of grudge, having a grudge towards somebody,
Hmm.
that type of.
Yeah.
Oh, I had a dog that definitely had a
They don't
grudge.
carry that.
I had a dog that definitely had a grudge toward another dog, Paul. This
Oh,
dog
yeah?
he loved everybody and everything, but there was one dog, and this dog was like behind a fence on a green belt where we would take walks. And every time we would go by that fence, as soon as that dog behind the fence made a noise, my dog just wanted to get him.
Huh.
So I don't know. Anyway.
Yeah, and so it's actually, I mean, I think it gets complicated with animals too. I don't know that we need to get into animals psychology in this discussion, but I mean, I think that they, like there are dogs or animals that, for example, that I've known of that don't like men, period. And it gets transferred to all men,
Right.
that they come in contact with, presumably from some kind of past experience they've had, with males, and they sort of just associate with males, and so they get very.
Well, while we're on the subject of animals, I don't know if everyone knows that John Leiter's daughter, Elizabeth Leiter, John Leiter is a Bible lover who lives here in Myrtle Beach. His daughter directed and produced a documentary on Jane Goodall that aired on National Geographic this past week. And it's really quite excellent. And you get there's some beautiful footage of chimps. And I recognize some of my relatives there in that footage. So I think if you have access to the National Geographic, I think it streams, and anyway, it will be aired again several times.
I think you can probably watch it on their website too.
Mm-hmm.
Back to the ego for a second. Does anybody, I was trying to remember, when does the ego form gradually, and then does it become fully formed in human form? I don't think so. I think the ego it's there from the beginning, isn't it?
Well, that's interesting. I think
I thought
Bob,
maybe there was something in this chart from God Speaks, but I don't see any ego in it.
from my remembering and
Your
reading,
voice has isn't working. Are there other people hearing that too?
Yeah.
Yeah.
is that me? You're talking about
Yeah,
me?
your audio is all screwed up, Richard.
Is this any better?
Nope, it's all
Nope.
staticky.
Okay, is this better?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, I'll try that. As far as I know, Greg, I don't know if Baba really referring to lower forms as having ego. There is the development of the mental bodies and subtle bodies that evolve over time, over animal forms. And of course, the ego is connected with the mental body. So maybe in that sense, but it's not fully, those mental bodies and subtle bodies are still evolving, and they're not in the final complete form yet in those lower stages.
Well, a question to be explored.
Yeah.
I'd
So
say
I
would say if they have an ego, it's just expressed through instinct, and it's still developing.
Right.
In one of these charts in God Speaks, the ego shows up when you get a gross body. It goes all the way up through animals, and there's no mention of the ego. But at that point,
Which chart?
well, in my book, it's on between 240 and 241.
Oh, yeah.
Paula,
And
do you
the
want?
ego, yeah.
Paula, could you just maybe put that? I don't know if you can put that picture chart. Yeah. Okay.
Is that?
Yeah.
Wait a minute. Everything's
good.
falling out of my book.
Yeah. But not so much that we'll actually study it, but just so if we're acquainted, we know which chart.
A little higher. Yeah.
Got it?
Yeah.
And
So,
here's
so
the
are
lower
you,
part of the page.
mhm.
Yeah.
So are you saying, Paula, that the ego shows up in the animal forms?
No, it showed up as in the first in gross body. As ordinary humans.
Oh, okay.
Just past animals to ordinary humans. And then where it comes down to the ego, it says sanskaras, unexpressed desires, the seat of individuality.
Yeah, thank you. That's the chart I was remembering somehow, I think. Yeah. So it, yeah, first shows up in the human form, at least in this chart.
Marge, did you want to ask any questions or say anything?
No, I was just trying to relate a lot of what was happening to personal experiences and trying to make it not so heady. And I don't know that it's appropriate or if it even fits, but just remembering times in meditation and remembering an experience in India and then in taking care of my parents, trying to give up thinking about myself, and then I'd run into problems in their care, and I would try to figure it out, and then I would just totally give it to Baba, and then the next thing I knew, an answer appeared that I could never have thought of. And so I was experiencing all these feelings of not even knowing that I was doing some of this that you're talking about, of giving up myself and my ego to in love and care of someone, and then depending on God. And the other thing that kept going through my mind was when you said nothingness always was, or whatever, how you said it, I just kept focusing on hearing that God is, God was, and God always will be, and that God always was. So it's like, it's hard for me to grasp nothingness when I believe that God is and was and ever shall be. It's hard for me to make that leap into nothing, the nothingness, because I don't think that God is nothing, personally. And the other thing I thought about is sometimes when I have real difficulties with someone or some issue, or that I picture packaging it into a box, wrapping it up, or if it's so complicated, I picture a ball of twine all wound up, and then whichever it is, I present it to Baba, and he throws it up into the air, and it all turns into little particles of light. And then he reaches out and I climb into his lap. So all that crap has disappeared into nothingness. And then there's him, there's only him, and he's embracing me. So those are the thoughts that I've had during all of this.
Nice.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My mind always seems to work backwards rather than forwards, or inside out and upside down or something. But I have it reversed. I have that the nothing came out of the everything.
That's true.
Yeah,
Right.
I heard of that too.
Yeah, so it was like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Hold on, hold the phone. The other part that I got too was the image that I got when we were talking about the piercing of the mind. I don't even remember what part that was, but it reminded me of the transverberation of the heart of Saint Teresa, where her heart was pierced, and the ecstasy that she went into. You know, it's like, I mean, she was completely taken. Forever. I don't know why. I just got that image. Maybe because it was a sword that pierced her heart, you know, a spear. But what God did when the angel did that, you know, yeah.
Beautiful.
Well, there's something to think about. Padre Pio had that too. And they, their hearts were examined after they died, and they lived with hearts that were broken. They had been pierced. But anyway, you know that happened on a physical level, but what did that do in the mental and the subtle and mental spheres in them? I don't know. Anyway, that's where my mind went.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I had a thought on piercing the mind, that this is the action of the perfect master or the avatar.
Say that again, Marvin.
That this piercing of the mind may refer to actions of the perfect masters and the avatar, because they're the only ones that could bring our mind to
Gotcha.
that state.
Yeah.
I don't remember the quote, Rich. What was the quote about piercing the mind? Do you remember?
Well, I can find it here. It may take me a minute. The piercing of the mind amounts to the complete withdrawal of consciousness from the universe to its total absorption in God.
Well, that would fit what Marvin said. Baba said that's only possible through the grace of a perfect master of the avatar. Perfect being, not necessarily perfect master, but a perfect being.
Another thought that I had through all of this, of the dissolution of the ego, it's like decluttering, which is a major problem for me. So then I think of, on a spiritual realm, I've got the same issue of letting go of the ego, decluttering.
Baba's like the Marie Kondo of the spiritual.
Yeah, right. Only keep what makes you happy.
Right, it gives you joy.
It gives you joy. That's
joy.
better.
Sparks joy.
You know, I don't hold on to it as much as I'd like, but the provisional ego that Baba gave us really helps. It's like, I was talking to him this morning. I said, you know, Baba, my mind is like a puppy. And it's just this really funny little puppy. And please take my puppy. But, you know, when he says, when we remember, you know, that, I don't know, that when we judge ourselves, when we think all these things about ourselves, Baba says, just remember that it's me doing that. And that's, I don't know, it's easy to hold on to it, but it's much nicer to let him do it. Like he says, if you made a mistake, I made the mistake, you know? If you did something good, you're not the one that did it, I did it. That's like what Marge was talking about. The things that happen in my life, all my life, they're not things that I could ever have planned, even if I wanted to. You know, it's like Baba just kind of unravels it before me, and I get all upset beforehand because I don't know what I'm doing or what's going on. And then, you know, he always just kind of, it's like he rolls out the red carpet before me, and it's like, just go, you know, just follow it. I'm working it out right in front of you, kind of thing.
Beautiful.
Nice. Nice.
Yeah, very nice.
I think we've gone from a very abstract conversation to a very personal one here. It's interesting.
That's because you have women in the group.
I was thinking the same thing.
So Daniel, it's about balance of the mind and heart. Huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice. It's interesting though that urge is there though, you know. It just emerges naturally. It's like when you feel like it's too far one direction, the other one has to express itself. You know?
Yeah.
And when we give you guys a nudge, you do great. Because you're coming up with beautiful personal feeling things. Thank you.
Well, it's just about almost 5:30, not quite. So unless someone else has something they want to add to our discussion or any personal comment. Otherwise, I guess we. Yes.
Thank you, Richie.
Yeah.
You're doing a really good job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You're
thanks.
welcome.
Bob.
Thanks.
And thanks everyone for sharing. It was wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks for the sharing. Thanks for coming.
You know, what's nice too is there's a lot of people returning. So there's a kind of a continuity with the group that creates more connections and more heart feelings and makes for a more enriching experience.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah. And we had a couple of new people, three new people. So that was good too.
Yeah.